Welcome to the channel. My name is Matthias. Today we're going to talk about X Factor issues 17 and 18, written by Louise Simonson. In the first issue, we get the introduction of one of Marvel's very few Mexican heroes. It's Rictor. I'm actually very surprised that this is seldomly ever brought up, because the thing is that Rictor has never been written like a typical Mexican stereotype or a really offensive Mexican stereotype. The character was actually born in Guadalajara. The character himself has some cool earthquake type of powers, obviously referencing the notorious seismic activity that Mexico has. These issues came out in 1987, and if I remember correctly, there was like this really major earthquake in Mexico. I'm not sure if it was 1985 or 1986. The thing is that we get the introduction of this pretty badass character that, well, he's going to evolve into a badass character here. He's a pretty scrawny kid, but he's a far cry compared to the Rictor that we have nowadays. That in the Teeny Howard Excalibur series, where Rictor was part of the team, he sadly had like this regression back to being like this really insecure guy, and they super leaned into the fact that he was gay and he would fall in love with any guy at any moment. In many aspects, they totally destroy the Rictor that we got in the Peter David X Factor run, that he really built up the character. But it really irks me the fact that they focus on his sexuality and not on his cultural heritage, that you can get a lot out of that. Now, before we get into these issues, I do have to make the really stupid observation that in many issues from this particular era of X Factor, there's like this weird fixation on helicopters. Like almost every single issue, you're going to see a helicopter in it, or multiple helicopters. So now let's get into issue 17, that actually starts off with the funeral of Warren Worthington III. He had seemingly unalived himself, and this had happened because of what had went down during the Mutant Massacre. He had lost his wings. Also, he was pushed and manipulated by Cameron Hodge, but no one knows that he was actually rescued by Apocalypse. I really do have to mention that Louise Simonson did a fantastic job, not only building up the character of Apocalypse, but also making Cameron Hodge to be, even though he's super obvious, but a cool villain that also took his time to enact his master plan. So now we're at the funeral of Angel, and the thing is that Cameron Hodge had filtered to the media that he had funded X Factor, and that even though these guys were mutant hunters, he was a mutant. The public goes crazy over this whole revelation because the whole premise of the series was sort of weird. X Factor posed as mutant hunters, but the thing is that they were really rescuing mutants, and they would sell their services in capturing mutants. Again, they were rescuing them, but this fed into anti-mutant hysteria in general and made things worse. And the thing is that when X Factor had to operate using their powers openly, they would go by another name called the Exterminators. It was very, very convoluted. But the thing is, now at this funeral, we have all these anti-mutant protests, and obviously the members of X Factor are not taking this too well. Also, during this time, Iceman had gone on an adventure with Thor in Asgard, and Loki had messed with Iceman, and now his ice powers are totally out of whack. Especially to the fact that he's not immune to the cold that his powers produce. So the thing is that they enter the church where they're going to have the funeral, and someone had graffitied all over the church a racial slur towards mutants. The whole scenario, I have to say, you would not see something like this in a comic book nowadays. Like, even though nowadays there's some good runs, some great stories, a lot of times I feel like they're a little bit toothless, that Marvel's afraid of depicting stuff like this that is more impactful. Now, that aside, I do have to make another observation, and it's the fact that I think this is the first issue where we get to see Apocalypse's ship for the first time. So after the funeral service, X Factor actually gets a call for a mission that the Exterminators, with their leader Rictor, have taken the city of San Francisco hostage. that he will use his powers to destroy everything there. And the thing is that Jean Grey especially really freaks out over the situation because obviously X-Factor also used the name of Exterminator. So who are these guys taking the city of San Francisco hostage? So the thing is that X-Factor arrives on the scene. They start fighting against the Exterminator's forces, and they discover that they're actually called the Right. And this battle actually takes place in a bunch of helicopters, like X-Factor's in a helicopter. The Right is also in their helicopters. They are zipping around the city, but the thing is that X-Factor arrives to the Right's headquarters. And there they discover that the evil mutant Rictor is actually a kid that has been kidnapped. And the Right actually had forced him to use his powers to basically have the whole city at ransom. So after this big surprise and revelation, X-Factor rescues Rictor. While all this is going down, Cameron Hodge is feeding bogus news to the media, portraying everyone involved as evil mutants. Now, issue 18 really leans into the soap opera aspect of the series, but it is actually a pretty good issue on its own too. Now, back at X-Factor's base, Rictor gets to meet all the other young mutants that X-Factor has saved up until this moment. So he meets for the first time Rusty, Skids, Leech, Artie. Iceman's powers are totally out of control, and at this moment he's out of commission. So what happens is we get this conversation between Rusty and Cyclops. Like, he's trying to emphasize the need to train his mutant powers, learn how to use them. And the whole conversation goes in this direction where Cyclops sort of tells Rusty that he sort of longs for the time when he was dealing with Phoenix, who was not Jean Grey. She was a copy of Jean Grey, but the thing is, she was so powerful that she could actually hold Cyclops' powers back. So he could remove his visor without worrying that he was going to blow off her head. And obviously, Jean Grey overhears this conversation. Because the thing is that Jean is having to deal with the fact that... And also, she takes this very poorly because Phoenix basically stole her identity. And also, she's dealing with the fact that Madeline Pryor looked just like her. And she had gotten married with the love of her life, Scott Summers. They had a kid together. So basically, this issue takes soap opera to the next level. Like, it goes up to 11. So we get a spat between Cyclops and Jean Grey over this whole situation. So the thing is that Cameron Hodge knows about the situation because he's spying on everyone on the team through cameras, and he has microphones all over the place. So what he does, he creates this hologram of the Dark Phoenix who tries to seduce Scott Summers. Jean walks in on the situation, and things obviously get totally out of hand. We actually get a brief little battle between Jean Grey and Scott Summers. Now, even though this issue is very Days of Our Lives, the end of it is actually pretty fantastic because what happens is, and it's worth reading, like, don't let me spoil it for you. Just stop this video here.